What's up, everyone? James here, coming at you with a very special video. I got the opportunity to interview one of the creators and producers of Disney Gargoyles, Greg Weisman. Thank you again, Greg, for doing this interview with me. I greatly appreciate it. It will definitely go down as one of the highlights of my life. I'd also like to thank Amy from Dynamite Entertainment and my buddy Jeff from Dynamic Forces DF, who helped make this happen. You can catch me on Whatnot with him on Wednesdays. I'll have a link to that page in the description box below, along with the timestamps and questions I asked Greg during this interview. This was the first interview I've ever conducted, so I hope it did a good job, and I really hope you enjoy the video. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new here, or if you're listening to this on Spotify, make sure you hit that follow button. Other than that, I hope you have an awesome day, and always remember every day to go beyond. Now let's begin. First off, I want to say thank you very much for taking the time out to do this interview with me. I greatly appreciate it very much.
Happy to do it. Thank you.
So one thing I wanted to start off with, because I'm someone who, when I'm a fan of an individual, of their work, of who they are, I like to know, what inspired them to do what they do. What's their origin story? Like, for example, Arnold Schwarzenegger, I read his autobiography recently. I read Val Kilmer's, because those are just two people to name that I truly like a lot. Saw the Christopher Reeve documentary that was released. So my first question to you is just, what is your origin story? What inspired you to do what you do?
I mean, they're answers of varying lengths, but I love television. Always loved comic books, in particular superhero comic books. When I was, I guess, basics of my origin story go back to when I was 19 in college. And back then, I only knew one other guy at my school who was a year younger than me who read comics at all. And so, every Thursday I had a car, he didn't. So we'd drive over to the comic book store and buy a bunch of comics each. And one month, I saw that Marvel was announcing a new talent search for writers and artists, etc. And I thought, wow, they're just going to get inundated with people looking, wanting to break into the business. And I felt like anything I submitted would get lost in the shuffle. And but I thought, if Marvel's announcing a new talent search, then I bet DC will announce one too. So instead of prepping materials for Marvel, I prepped materials for DC. And sure enough, a month later, DC announced its new talent search. And so I sent those materials in. And years later, when I was on staff at DC, I was tasked with emptying a file cabinet that no one knew what was in it anymore. And in it, I found the logbook for logging in new talent submissions. And my name was literally second on the list because, I was ready when they announced it. And the only name ahead of me was someone who lived in Manhattan, who clearly just drove the thing over or, walked it over, or cabbed it over, or subwayed it over, or whatever. So they logged me in. They logged in my name and address. And then they promptly lost my materials, and I found those too. They had, how hanging file folders work. They had slid between two folders, slid to the bottom of the drawer, and all the folders covered it, so no one could see them.
Mm-hmm.
So when they went to send responses out, about 70% of their submissions were artists, about 30% were writers. So they just took a guess that I was an artist, and they sent me this whole packet about, drawing for DC Comics. And I was outraged in the way that only a 19-year-old can be outraged. And I wrote this very angry letter. where I said how unprofessional I thought this was, that I was a professional, which was a lie. I'd never sold anything in my life. So, of course, I kept copies of all my work. If they lost my stuff, that was fine. All they had to do was send it to me. Is request another copy, and I would have sent it, which was true. And again, I wrote this letter in a flurry of anger, and in those days we didn't have email. 1983, nothing like that. So I, put it in an envelope, addressed it to Dick Giordano at DC Comics, and put a stamp on it, put it in the mailbox. And 2 seconds after I did that, I thought, "Oh my God, what have I done?" Um, I'm like, I'm never going to work in at DC again. I may never work it again. I never work at DC. I never work in comics. And I just thought, ugh, so dumb. But it was in a mailbox. You couldn't get it out. Couldn't take it back. So I told my friend Doug, who like my one comic book friend Doug, about this. And he just said, "Wow, you're an idiot." And I said, "Yeah." And then a few weeks later, I lived in a dorm room with a roommate who was not into comics, didn't know anything about it. And we had this thing that we called a phone, but which nowadays people would call a landline, I guess. The phone rang, and my roommate answered, and he listens for a second. He holds the phone out to me, and he says, "This guy Dick Giordano wants to talk to you." Now, Dick Giordano at the time was executive editor of DC Comics, and he was the guy I'd written the letter to. And there was no way Dick Giordano was going to call me, so I thought this was my friend Doug, you know, uh,
Messing with you.
messing with me.
Mm.
So I get on the phone and I'm like, "So this is Dick Giordano." And a voice at the other end goes, "Yes, this is Dick Giordano." And I knew immediately that it wasn't Doug. And I hadn't told anyone else about this. So I thought, "Oh my God, it's Dick Giordano." And I'm like, I'm such an idiot. First I sent this asshole letter, and now I've just gotten on the phone and acted like an asshole again. Um, and But he was very cool, and he said, "I liked your letter. It was made some good points. It was well written, and you made some good points." And I'm like stunned, and he goes, "We should talk. Are you going to be in New York anytime soon?" And I went to school on the West Coast, and I just said, "Yeah. In fact, I'll be there in March." And he said, "Great. I'm going to put you on with my assistant, and she'll make an appointment with you to come in March, and we'll talk." So he put me on with his assistant Alice, who later became a friend of mine, and Dick became a mentor of mine, and and we made an appointment in March. Now, of course, I had no plans to go to New York in March, but now I did. I had to figure out how I was going to get there. I had some good luck. My dad had some extra, some miles that I could cash in a free ticket. He let me have the miles. I had a cousin who lived in New York City in Manhattan, so I was able to crash on her couch. And the day of the interview, I'm thinking it's like a job interview. How I'm dressed right now. I don't know if your audience is just hearing this or they're going to see it also.
They're gonna see it as well. I'm recording the whole thing.
So if they're looking, this is pretty much how I've dressed my entire life and my entire career. I wear a t-shirt and jeans and that kind of thing. But for this meeting, I got a suit and tie, and it's pouring rain. And my cousin comes over to me with a subway map, and she says, "Hey, I'm going to show you how to get to where you need to go on the subway." And I say to her, "Yeah, I don't think that's a good idea. I'm afraid I'll get lost on the subway, and I think I'm just going to take a cab." And she says to me, "You're going to hail a cab in Manhattan in the rain." And I said, "Yeah, I think that's probably the best plan." And she doesn't say, "You're never going to be able to hail a cab in Manhattan in the rain, in the pouring rain." She does not say that. She just says, "Good luck with that." And she leaves to go to work. And I leave 5 minutes later. I've got an umbrella. I'm in a suit and a tie. I immediately step off the curb looking to hail a cab. And I don't know, you remember in Groundhog Day when he steps off the curb and his foot goes up to his ankle in ice cold
Hmm.
water? That was me. So immediately one foot is completely soaked through. Um, my umbrella, the wind in the canyons of New York folds the umbrella up and the tines break, so the umbrella instantly becomes useless. And of course, it takes me about 20 minutes to hail a cab, and I was lucky that's all it took, that it didn't take
Hmm.
2 hours or something like that. But after about 20 minutes, I get in the cab, I'm soaked, um, and it takes me to DC Comics, which at the time, now it's in Burbank, California, but back then it was in Manhattan at 666 Fifth Avenue. I thought was a very intimidating address. Um, and I went up there and I looked like a drowned rat, but Dick was great. He always took me seriously, and um, he helped me get freelance work for a couple years while I was in college. And when I graduated college, it's a much more complex story than this, but I've already taken too much time with it. Um, I eventually got on staff there out of college and spent 2 years on staff as an editorial assistant, then as an assistant editor, then as an associate editor. Um, while I was there, I started writing comics. I even wrote one episode of co-wrote one episode of an animated series called Gem of the Holograms. But eventually, I moved back to California, went to graduate school at USC, and uh, shortly after that, got a job at Disney TV Animation, which is another whole story, um, and became a very junior executive there. Worked my way up to director of series development. Um, Developed a show called Gargoyles. Started producing that show. Moved over from being an executive to being the quote unquote talent, um, and that move pretty much defined my life. And I kept a hand in comics, not a lot, but a little bit over the
Hmm.
years. Mostly done animation, written half dozen novels, a lot of comic books, and a lot of episodes of TV. And I've produced even more than I've written. Um, and that's sort of the origin story.
So, was your first comic book series the Captain Atom series you co-wrote with Carrie Bates?
It's the first one that got published, not the first one I did. I wrote many series and I got paid for them, but that did not, for various reasons, get published. I wrote a series for
Oh.
New Talent Showcase um, called Red, White, and Blue, and then before it could get published, the editor Karen Berger, who was editing New Talent Showcase, left and was replaced by a guy named Sal Amendola, who changed the name of the book to Talent Showcase. Um, and the idea was before it had been teaming new writers with new artists. Now he wanted to team new writers with old artists and old writers with new artists. So that would be half and half. And he was not interested in superheroes. He was like, all the other books are superheroes. Let's do different stuff here. So then I wrote a Western for him. And by the time that was ready to go, the whole book got canceled. I wrote a Supergirl script, and then they decided they were killing off Supergirl in Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Hmm.
And then Dick said to me, "We're going to need a new Supergirl for copyright reasons, but it can't be connected to the Superman mythos directly." So I wrote an original character who, in the first issue, meets Superman, and he sort of gives her his blessing to go by Supergirl. But then
Oh.
John Byrne took over Superman, and he was like, "No, if there's going to be a new Supergirl, I'm the one who's going to do it." And he created the sort of Matrix version of Supergirl that came later. So mine was Shell. I
Was
did.
was that the Man of Steel series he was working on?
I forget now, but yeah, Man of Steel or Superman or Action. I forget which which ones John was doing, but whatever it was, John was the Superman guy for a while there, and it was nothing against me. I mean, he didn't even know me. It's just that he was like, I'm the Superman guy. If there's going to be a new Supergirl, I'm the one who's going to do it.
Yeah.
Which was understandable. And it was also understandable why DC sort of said, oh, we got John Byrne on the one hand, or this unknown guy named Greg Weisman on the other hand. Who are we going to go with?
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they're going to go with John. It wasn't like I didn't understand the situation. I mean, obviously, I was disappointed, but I wrote a whole Black Canary miniseries, 4 issues. And then in the miniseries, Black Canary and Green Arrow and Justice League and other comics had been dating for like over a decade, maybe 20 years even. And so I was going to finally have them get engaged. And Frank Miller's The Dark Knight Returns came out, and that established the Prestige format as something worthwhile. And so Mike Grell came in and pitched a Green Arrow Prestige book called The Longbow Hunters. And Dick said to Mike, well, that's great because we're doing this Black Canary miniseries, and at the end of the miniseries, Green Arrow and Black Canary get engaged, and so you can pick up on that and run. And Mike was like, I don't want them engaged. Don't do that. Don't do that mini. He's like, or if you're going to do the miniseries, don't let them get engaged. But my whole thing is built to that. That's what it was about. So again, it was like, you got Mike Grell or Greg Weisman. And the answer, of course, is we're going with Mike Grell. So, I got paid for all this stuff. There were other things. There was an issue of Firestorm just to fill an issue of Firestorm. There were various other things, but none of it got published. And it was very frustrating.
That's interesting. I'm not 100% familiar with like the back end stuff of comic books, the behind the scenes, but I'm not surprised like a movie script or a pitch show that like you wrote it all out and they're just like, oh, we're going to put it on the back end, or we're going to not use it, but we'll pay you for it.
Well, they'd already paid me for it. It was too late to not pay me.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
But, they had ordered it, so they paid me for it. But no, there's no obligation for them to use it, and they just, in essence, each time had various circumstances. The book got canceled. A different creator came in who had more prestige. The situation changes where the character I was writing is dead, so that's not going to happen. All sorts of things went wrong for me for a couple of years. 2 or 3 years. And then I started working with Cary Bates, who had written Superman and Flash for a long time. We started sort of collaborating unofficially on a book he was doing called Silverblade. And then when he got Captain Atom, we really started working together. But there were, for 9 months, the editor didn't want me to have credit on the book. His excuse for that was that he thought it would make Cary look bad or something. It would diminish him or something. Finally, on the 10th issue, I actually, I've been co-plotting with Cary for 9 issues. Then on the 10th issue, I actually wrote the script. And so even that, at that point, the editor sort of said, okay, well, I guess we should give him credit. And so I started co-writing with issue 10, Captain Atom officially. And then at some point, the situation sort of flipped, and I was doing most of the writing on the book, and Cary was sort of co-plotting. But we worked together on it through about 50 issues, I think, and a couple of annuals and a secret origin story or something.
Wow.
So, in those days, it was selling about 60,000 copies, which put it right on, always on the verge of being canceled. It was, those numbers were such that, nowadays, if your comic sells 60,000 every month in and month out, people are like, wow, this one's doing great. That was with no alternate covers or anything like that. No,
yeah.
But back then that was just, it wasn't a failure, but it wasn't a success. And we were always on the verge of getting canceled. everyone had sort of different reasons for or different solutions as to how to sort of push it up higher, and we tried all sorts of things, and then finally I just got frustrated, and by then I was working at Disney full time. So after issue 50, I left the book.
Okay, so you were still working on that series while you were already moved at California, working at Disney.
Yeah, I think I was still working at. I started at Disney in '89. I think we did Captain Adam through mid '91, something like that. So there were a couple overlap years with Disney and DC before I let Captain Adam go. And then as soon as I let it go, like 2 or 3 months later, they decided to turn Captain Adam into a villain, which didn't make any sense to me anyway. And then everyone figured out that's what they were going to do, so they changed their minds and made Hawk the villain instead from Hawk and Dove. And then, someone had already written Captain Adam as a villain, so a year later, when everyone had sort of forgotten about it, they went and made him a villain again. And basically then at some point, because Dr. Manhattan from Watchmen had been loosely based on Captain Adam, they sort of reverse engineered Captain Adam to have Dr. Manhattan's powers, which is not what he had when Carrie and I wrote him. And so they kind of turned him into a walking bomb. So it seemed like every time anyone used Captain Adam, the only thing they used him for was to blow everything up. And they made him pretty incompetent. I don't really like what they've done with the character since. Carrie and I came back after Rebirth. Carrie wrote The Fall and Rise of Captain Adam. And I helped out a little bit, not much, but a little. And it felt like 90% of what we had to do was just clean up all the various versions of Captain Adam that they'd done since Rebirth had started. And try and, fix the character. And it just wasn't fun anymore doing that character. It was too bad because I loved the character and I loved our supporting cast and everything, but it didn't. Too many people had sort of messed with it. It didn't.
Is that your favorite DC character, or one that you're just like the most passionate about?
I love Captain Adam, but no, my favorite DC character is Black Canary. But and Supergirl's a close second. But I do love Captain Adam. I'd love to do him again if I was given a little bit of free reign. It felt like when Carrie and I came back to do The Fall and Rise, we'd say, well, let's do this. And they're like, no. Well, what if we did that? No. All right. Well, we got to fix this. Okay, yeah, fix that. But it just became, they didn't really let us have the freedom that we wanted, I think, to really fix the character. And so I think the book looks great. It's got fantastic art. But I think we only got to go sort of halfway to where we wanted to go with the character.
So
thought that was too bad.
You got done with, so you were completely done with that, and did that lead you to pitching Gargoyles? Or were you already working on Gargoyles while you were working on the Captain Adam series?
I mean, the two things aren't connected. I think we started working on Gargoyles in '91. I finished working on Captain Adam in '91, but that sounds like one was a result of the other, and that's not true. Mm-hmm. The original version of Gargoyles was a comedy adventure series.
Yeah, that was going to be my question, because I was shocked to discover that.
Right. So there was a show that we were doing at Disney at the time called Disney's Adventures of the Gummy Bears, which I thought was a fantastic show. It had this great medieval backstory show created by a guy named Jim Magon and Art Vitello. And I wasn't involved in the creation of the show at all or its development, but by the time I came on, it was already up and running, and I worked a little bit as an executive in current programming on it. But the main thing was that I just thought it was terrific. And I wanted us to do another show like that. It was original. It was named after this candy, but it was an original idea. It
Hmm.
wasn't based on a movie or based on something else. And so I said, let's try and do a show like that. And it was the 90s, so everything had to be edgy in the 90s.
Well, yeah, the comic book industry was what was going on there too.
Right. I mean, it was just all across media. Everything had to be edgy. That was the buzzword of the 90s. So we did two things with gummy bears to make it edgier. And one was instead of them being cute, cuddly little multicolored bears, we made them cute, multicolored monsters or gargoyles. And this was an era of Gremlins, the original movie Gremlins, and so this notion of doing gargoyles seemed like a lot of fun. So we had all these fun, cute little gargoyles running around. And the second thing we did to make it edgy is Gummy Bears was set in this sort of vague, pastoral, medieval landscape. We're like, no, that our backstory would be in the medieval times, but we put them to sleep and have them wake up in Manhattan in the 20th century, in modern times, and that would be edgier also. So the idea was to do an edgy version of Gummy Bears, but still a comedy, not a drama, nothing truly dark, just a little edgier. So we had all these gargoyles, and I pitched that show to Michael Eisner, who at the time was chairman of the Walt Disney Company. And Michael passed; he didn't like it. But my boss, Gary Kreisel, liked it and said, "There's something to this. Keep working on it." So I showed the pitch to a handful of people just to get their feedback on it. And one of the people I showed it to was a guy named Tad Stones, who's the creator of Darkwing Duck and Chippendale Rescue Rangers. And Tad had worked at feature animation for a few years before he came to television animation. And he had friends still at feature, and he had seen an early version, what we call an animatic, of the movie Beauty and the Beast. So he said when he saw my pitch, and we had the human female character that eventually became Elisa Maza, we had a version of her in that old comedy development who was sort of like the friend to all these cute little gargoyles, right? And he said, instead of doing all these little gargoyles, what if instead you did one big gargoyle and you did a kind of Beauty and the Beast thing with Elisa and this big gargoyle? And that really clicked with me. My background was, of course, superheroes. It wasn't funny animals. So I worked with an artist named Greg Buller to create the character Goliath, to be this big sort of heroic gargoyle. And when we were finished with that, we took the whole comedy show and we put it through the prism of Goliath. And we came out the other end with the show that you're familiar with Gargoyles, this action drama. And we got very excited about it. We created these villains, Xanatos and Demona and the Pack and the Mutates and all this different stuff, right? We were so excited. We put together this huge pitch with all these ideas. We just thought all these ideas were great, so it's going to be so much fun. Eisner's going to love it. Only Eisner didn't like it.
Oh,
And so the next day we had this meeting with the number 2 guy at the studio. Well, no, that's not true. But with Jeffrey Katzenberg, who was chairman of the Walt Disney Studio. So he worked for Eisner, who was chairman of the whole company. Jeffrey was chairman of the studio. And so my boss, Gary Kreisel, reported to Jeffrey, who reported to Michael. And Jeffrey had been in the meeting the day before. And so in the meeting the next day, he said, and you're going to keep working on Gargoyles, right? And I said, well, no. I pitched it to him as a comedy adventure show. He didn't like it. Then yesterday I pitched it to him as an action drama. He didn't like it. I don't know what else I do. He's like, oh, it's not that he didn't like it. He didn't pass on it. He just thought it needed more work. Now, I'd been there yesterday. I'd heard him pass on it. I know that Eisner didn't like it. I know it. But what that told me was that Jeffrey liked it. And so I went back to the drawing board for a third time with my team, and we looked at the show. And when we looked at it really carefully, I said, there's nothing wrong with the show. The problem is the pitch. We got carried away with all these ideas. It became distracting. So we cut all this stuff out, stuff that we would ultimately use in the show, like the pack and the mutates and other things. We did ultimately use those things in the show, but in the pitch, they were distracting. So we really focused the pitch on Elisa and Goliath. We really pushed the Beauty and the Beast thing. By this time, the movie had come out, and it was something of a small hit for the Walt Disney Company. And so we went back 6 months later, which is a year after I pitched the comedy version, and probably another year after we had started developing the thing, at least. And I pitched a much shorter, much tighter version of the exact same show, but just really focused on Goliath and Elisa. And this time Eisner bought it. And at the end of the meeting, Jeffrey turned to me and said, "You added a lot to that, didn't you?" And of course, I hadn't added anything. I just cut things. But I said to him, yes, I did. And then we got to make the show. And from that point on, Jeffrey and Michael were both big champions in the show, as was my boss and Rich Frank and Bruce Cranston and a whole bunch of people up and down the line were big champions in the show. And I moved over to produce it, and the rest is history. Yes.
That is very interesting that it took you not took you, but that you initially pitched it as a comedy adventure series, and then they wanted a action drama, and that's what they went
If they
with.
wanted that, that's just the direction we took it. And then they didn't want it, and then they did. So it's not like someone said to me, "Change this to an action drama." No one said that. Tad said, "Ditch all the little gargoyles and have one big gargoyle and do Beauty and the Beast thing." And that just clicked with me. But Tad wasn't even saying change it to an action drama. That may have been what he had in mind. It may not, but that's not what he said. He just gave us that Beauty and the Beast advice, which was key to selling.
Yeah.
And it worked. So, but it wasn't like someone was saying to me, "We need an action drama. You're giving us a comedy adventure. We need an action drama." I'm like, that was not the note. The note was just no.
Yeah. Just simple.
And it's not like we didn't sell comedy after that. We sold Bonkers, Goof Troop, Timon and Pumbaa, Aladdin, Schnookman's Meat, funny cartoon show, and many others that were comedies or comedy adventure shows. But we didn't sell the Gargoyles version of that. And, I think that would have been a really fun show, really fun comedy adventure show. But I'm very glad that it worked out the way it did, because I think the Gargoyles we have is a richer property than it would have been if it had just been a comedy show.
Now, because there's a question from a viewer, and I thought it was a very good question, which is, how did you convince Disney to produce a series a lot darker when compared to the other shows they had at the time?
Well, that was a feature, not a bug. One of the concerns that a bunch of us had back in the day, including my boss Gary, not especially him, was that if you looked at the Disney afternoon, so we had this 2-hour block in most markets, not everywhere, but in most markets we had a 2-hour block on the Disney afternoon, and it was full of funny animals, ducks, bears, chipmunks, whatever Goofy is, dogs, and all those shows were very, very different. Goofy was basically a sitcom. DuckTales was sort of a comedy, Raiders of the Lost Ark kind of thing. They all had very different feels, very different things. But if you were just looking at it from a distance, what you're seeing is one funny animal show after another funny animal show, right? And Gary in particular felt we're doing really well now, but at some point for the audience, the pendulum is going to swing in the other direction and they're going to want other stuff. Batman the Animated Series came out and sort of indicated that that kind of thing could work. And he's like, we should be diversifying. And we diversified in two directions simultaneously. We did Gargoyles, which was action drama, and we did Schnookums and Meat, which was more Tex Avery style cartoon feel to it. And again, all of that was to sort of try and make the afternoon last longer. The afternoon ended up not lasting much longer through forces that had nothing to do with programming, but had to do with economics, so that the sort of syndication market began to evaporate for kids programming rapidly. So the afternoon after Gargoyles dropped down from being a 2-hour block to a 1-hour block, and then it basically went away. But at the time, we weren't thinking in those terms. We were just thinking about it from a programming standpoint. How do we keep this fresh? And so Gargoyles was a way to do that. Now, there were individual human beings at Disney who thought this was a mistake, that it was too dark and whatever. But, you know, the show was never designed to be dark. Obviously, it's darker if you're holding it up against DuckTales,
Yeah.
Chip and Dale. But the fact of the matter is that the Gargoyles only exist at night. During the day, they're stone. So we didn't want their nights to be dark and black and gloomy. To them, that was living. That was life. So we wanted to... color palette for Gargoyles is not dark.
No.
It's full of magentas and purples and blues and neon and all sorts of Manhattan at night kind of colors. And yeah, it's not bright daylight, but it's not, for example, if you compare the background paintings on both of which are great, you know, on Gargoyles to Batman the Animated Series. Batman the Animated Series is literally dark. I mean, their paintings were done on black paper. Ours weren't, you know. And I'm not knocking them. I love Batman the Animated Series. I'm just saying they were very different shows, and ours was not designed to be dark. What it was, in essence, was the superhero genre done without any of the obvious trappings. No one in capes or tights, you know. The Gargoyles could glide, but they couldn't fly. You know, but otherwise we were doing the superhero genre. We were just sort of sneaking it in the back door, so to speak. And, you know, superheroes can be dark, but they aren't always. And some episodes of Gargoyles are darker than others.
Oh, yes, they are. Yes, there is.
Some are lighter than others. And,
and
a lot of comedy.
Yeah, there's like a great mixture, but like when there are episodes where it's like, yeah, that's kind of dark, you know. One of my favorites, I laughed out loud because I rewatched the show earlier this year, and I laughed out loud at the scene of Demona when she's facing off against the Canmore Trio's father at the cathedral, and it's like maybe 5 minutes into the fight of him fighting her, and all of a sudden you just see his body go down the cathedral.
It's not even 5 minutes, and you never see the fight.
You never see
it. You see him telling his kids he's going up to get her, and then 2 minutes later he's falling.
Yeah, he's just. It was like I laughed because I just didn't expect it at all, and I was just like, yeah, that's pretty dark there. I was like, but it was awesome. It was awesome to see. I just didn't expect it, and you know, I love the whole Demona dynamic. My next question to you is when you were creating the Gargoyles, which one of them would you say that you like? You would say you put the most of you into? That's more like you than any others.
They all are. I don't think. I mean, if anything, character who. There are two characters that have a little more me in them. One is Xanatos. At least in his bid for immortality, I feel like that's a big part of my motivation. He wants it literally. He wants to be immortal literally. I think in terms of my kids, and I think in terms of my work. Like, you know, if I can be remembered, I'm not looking for some magical solution to immortality, but the world I live in, that kind of thing doesn't exist.
Hmm.
Uh, but I think you can find immortality in other ways, and that I have in common with Xanatos. And then there's a sort of hapless supporting character in the show called Vinny. Um,
Oh God, Vinny is so good.
uh,
Vinny is so good.
I think there's a lot of Vinny in me. So, uh,
Vinny is so good. I don't think my appreciation for Vinny grew not even during the show. It was during the slave labor comics when he was in the first two issues, and like then me like going back to like see his whole character arc to up to that point, and I was just like, Vinny is hilarious. Like Vinny.
I have a lot of fondness for Vinny. I gave him my birthday and all sorts of stuff. He sort of became representative for me of my relationship to the Gargoyles. So
And I do like how you don't forget about him. Because I was gonna ask you about them. I'll ask you about them later, but I like how he's in the slave labor just for those two issues, but then he does pop up in Bad Guys in Japan because he talks about getting a job, getting the security job. And he's like there just for a second, and I was just like, oh, Vinny's here.
yeah, and he appears in Gargoyle's Quest, which is part of the Dynamite.
Yes, he does. The
He's in a
was he was
couple
working
issues.
security?
He's working for that guy for some guy in Japan, and he has an offer for Goliath that we haven't said what it is yet, but Goliath agreed
Yes,
to do it. So Goliath has heard this offer and has said yes, um, but we don't know what it is yet.
that's awesome. The first season is great. The second season I have a little bit of a love more I have more love for because when I rewatch the show, I think you masterfully in that second season expanded the Gargoyles universe using the magic of the island of Avalon to send Goliath, Elisa, Bronx, and Angela on this like worldwide adventure that took them to different places that opened up this universe uh in an amazing way. It was like all these all the things we saw to new gargoyle clans to mythical beings to technology and even aliens. I just thought was like fantastic. I was like, wow, this is like really a huge universe, like bigger than we thought. Is there anything in there that you would like to revisit or expand upon? I personally love the New Olympians, because they did remind me in a sense to DC's New Gods, but they're also different and unique in their own way. But I just love that whole concept of New Olympians.
They are definitely Kirby-esque. New Olympians was actually something we developed before Gargoyles, but yeah, I mean, we when we got the order for season 2, season 1 had been 13 episodes. Season 2 was 52 episodes. We knew we had to expand the universe, so that was part of it. Another part of it is I was in a meeting with Michael Eisner, where Michael, this is somewhere around 94, 90, early 95, late 94, something like that. Um, where Eisner said, I want to buy Marvel Comics. And at the time, Marvel was in bankruptcy.
Mm.
So he could have gotten it for almost nothing. But they talked him out of it. I mean, I was in the room very excited and watched as all his senior executives talked him out of buying Marvel. And then he said, well, if we're not going to buy Marvel, we still have to do something because Warner Brothers has all the DC characters like Superman and Batman, Wonder Woman. We need something to compete with that. At Disney, we don't have any of those kind of action characters. Got all these great cartoon characters, all these Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck and all these great characters, hundreds of them, thousands of them, but we don't have any action sort of superhero characters. And then he turned to me and he said, could Gargoyles be the start of that? And I said, sure. And so we had marching orders to create a bunch of backdoor pilots and Gargoyles, and New Olympians was one of them. Um, Another was Pendragon. And we had ideas for a prequel series called Dark Ages, which I just did as a mini series a
Hmm.
year or so ago for Dynamite. Bad Guys was another spin-off that I did for SLG some time ago. Um, we had a sequel series set in the far future, which became Gargoyles 2198, and a bunch of other notions, Time Dancer and various other things that we were going to do as spin-offs. But then over time, Jeffrey left to found DreamWorks. Gary and Bruce went with him. Rich Frank left the company. Michael eventually left the company. All the support I had for Gargoyles, even just as a series, let alone it being the sort of foundation of a Gargoyles action universe or a Disney action universe, that all went away. And
Hmm.
so we didn't end up doing any of those things. But again, I've done a few of them in the comics since
Yep.
then. And there are many more I'd love to do, including New Olympians, which again is, as you mentioned, New Gods. I think of it more Eternals than New Gods a little bit, but that kind of thing, New Gods, Eternals, the Inhumans, those kinds of Kirby series were definite inspirations for New Olympians, and we'd love to do more.
It is. Are you? Is there anyone in like specific you would like to do? Like, if you had the opportunity, you would want to like do a mini
All of
series
them.
on all of them.
Yeah, I mean, everything is, nothing exists in a vacuum. So if you're
Hmm.
just saying in a vacuum, which would you like to do? Eventually, I'd like to do all of them. And if you're asking me, well, but what order do you want to do them in? I don't care. So, eventually, I want to do all of them. Um, so then you have to start thinking uh, in terms of the pragmatics of where you are. So when we were at SLG and they said, hey, let's do a spinoff, we talked about all the various options, and Bad Guys seemed like the best bet. Hey, let's do something like the Dirty Dozen. Suicide Squad had some success with that sort of thing over at DC. Let's do something like that. So we did. Um, then at SLG, they're like, hey, let's do a spinoff. And I'm like, well, here are six that I got ready to go. And Disney and Dynamite picked Dark Ages initially. Um, and then Gargoyles Quest, which really wasn't a spinoff. That was really just the main series, but focused on Demona more. And then
Hmm.
Demona was doing really well. So Frank Parr, who was my partner making the TV show back in the day, came to me and said, hey, let's do a Demona miniseries, and so we pitched a 5-issue Demona miniseries to Dynamite and Disney, and they said yes. But I'd still love to do New Olympians, Time Dancer, Heroes of Ulster. I'd love to do more Bad Guys, more Dark Ages. I'd love to do Gargoyles 2198. I'm sure I'm leaving something out because we had Pendragon. We had a bunch of ideas that I'd love to do them all. Plus, I love doing the main Gargoyles series with Goliath and Lisa and everybody. And
Hmm.
um, so, there are only so many hours a day. There are only so much money that Dynamite can sort of invest in it. But the book's doing well, and so we keep going. Today, as we're speaking, um, the second Gargoyles Fantastic Four team up came out today from
Yep.
Dynamite. Last month, Marvel put out Fantastic Four Gargoyles. I wrote both of them. I'm really proud of how they turned out. I think they're a lot of fun. And uh, we've got Gargoyles Demona issue 4 came out a week ago. And then the fifth and final issue comes out next month. And a Gargoyles Winter Special comes out next month. And then starting in January, we've got a 4-issue Gargoyles Darkwing Duck crossover,
Yep.
um, written by me, co-plotted by Tad Stones, who's the creator of Darkwing Duck. So I had worked back in the day on Darkwing for Tad. Tad had helped out on Gargoyle, so we both know both properties really well. And we worked together on this with Chiro doing the art, and it's turned out to be a lot of fun. And that starts, it's 4 months, January, February, March, April. And then we're working on stuff to follow that.
That's awesome, especially like when I heard about the Darkwing Duck. And I read I as soon as that dropped, I read it today. While I was at the gym, and read that newest issue of Gargoyles and Fantastic Four. I thought it was great.
Thanks.
I thought it was awesome. Uh, I only have two more questions about the show, and then go right into the slave labor, um, which I only have a couple questions in that as well. Uh, this one is kind of like the biggest question when it comes to the show. Really, in particular about one character, because I've gotten into a debate with a couple people about this one. But I want to hear it from the horse's mouth, the creator's mouth, your opinion on this. So the debate was whether Demona is truly a villain. And I hold the opinion that yes, she is complex. She's a very tragic character that is her own worst enemy. And yeah, she has done good things, but she's killed people. She's betrayed her clan. She tried to wipe out humanity. Recently, she tried to control them in Gargoyle's Quest. So my question to you as like the creator, in from your perspective, is Demona truly a villain?
I mean, absolutely. You try to commit genocide on the entire human race, and or you try to mind control them into doing your bidding. I think that puts you in a certain category. Now, I do think she is very complex. Magneto's complex. I think Demona's complex in much the same way. I think that for a '90s cartoon, uh, she was truly an original. And I think you can have some sympathy for her. I think she contains multitudes. She has legitimate gripes, but she, as you said, is her own worst enemy. And you know, gets carried away and can't learn from her mistakes, can't admit that she's wrong, and that pushes her down the path to villainy time and time again.
uh, Thank you for answering that. Now that ends that, and I could just clip this and send it to people. Uh, the last question about the show is, if you had the opportunity to bring it back in animation, would you, or would you rather keep them in the comics realm?
Oh, I'd love to bring back an animated series. I mean, you look at the success of X-Men '97. I'd
Mm-hmm.
love to come out with Gargoyles '98. If Disney were game for that, I'd do that right now. And So, I mean, that's the short answer. I love doing the comics, love it, but I would, I miss working with the actors. We had such a great cast.
Oh,
Uh,
you had a fan. Well, I think I think that's the best cast out of all the '90s shows. I think that's the best cast, hands down. Mm.
I'm not going to argue
I,
that.
I just think there's no debate. I mean, like I think that hands down, that they take the cake. There's no competition. Uh, Um, so when it comes to the slave labor comics, you'd introduce some like cool things in there, and that takes place after season two of the show. The first thing I want to ask you about that is you introduced another threat for the Manhattan Clan to face, and really all gargoyles to face, and they are the gargoyle hate group, the Quarrymen, led by John Castaway. Who in Bad Guys we find out who that truly is. They popped up briefly in the Dynamite series, but my question to you about them is simple: are they the big threat, or just an organization being used for something bigger?
uh, I don't know how to answer that. I mean,
Yeah,
they're a threat, and I'm not going to spoil anything.
yeah.
So, um, you know, I'm not sure what you expect me to say and answer to that.
Yeah, I mean, you didn't have to answer. I was just curious about them. Uh, I do love how they were formed in those. I think I think that was the very first issue of the
First
slave
two, yeah,
labor. Uh,
the first two. We try not to call it slave labor anymore. We're going with SLG.
oh, SLG.
Yeah, it might have been a funny name in
Yeah,
50 years
yeah.
ago. It's not quite as amusing anymore. So we just call it SLG.
uh, the second thing that you introduced in that series, that you did hint on in the show, that they, one of their members popped up, that I absolutely love that you did in the SLG comics is who are some of the important members, the hierarchy, and how the Illuminati operate. Which I absolutely love, by the way, it operating as like a pyramid. I thought that was like genius. But my question is, what inspired you to take arguably the biggest conspiracy theory I would say in human history and roll them into gargoyles?
I think Michael Reeves, who was our lead story editor in season one, head writer, brought up the Illuminati uh, almost as a throwaway in an episode with Matt Bluestone talking about them. But I have a tendency that nothing's thrown away, so nothing's wasted. So it's like, oh, if you mention the Illuminati, we're going to start doing the Illuminati, and we did them periodically throughout season two, um, and uh, and so that just became a rich territory to expand upon, moving into the comics, both the SLG eras and Dynamo.
Uh, the other thing I want to that you introduced that I thought was really, really awesome was the wild history and the truth behind the Stone of Destiny. It being this powerful force called the Spirit of Destiny that you showed throughout those issues, it being a part of human history in the Gargoyles universe, seemingly since like its inception. Is the Spirit of Destiny like the god of the universe or something else?
It's a god. I mean, it depends how you're defining the term God, I guess. So, you know, uh, pretty much says what he is or it is in
Mm-hmm.
um, those three issues, or at the end of that three-issue story, and
Mm-hmm.
uh, the SLG. I think the title is Rock of Ages,
Yes.
and it's bigger than any one stone. But if what you're asking is it God, like with a capital G, then the answer is no. But
Oh,
is it a god? Is Oberon? Is Odin? Is Nancy? Is Coyote? Depends how you're defining the term God, I guess. So it's up there with those guys, but no, I don't think of it as like God of the creation myth or something.
yeah. That's the one thing I was just curious, like whether it was a god or it was just the god of the universe, just because it was a part of the whole history. It seemed like, and I thought that was fantastic. And uh, and it's speaking to Xanatos Macbeth, and I've the third character I do not know how to pronounce his name.
Parador.
Parador. Thank you. Him basically the spirit or the god telling all three of them that like,
Well, and King Arthur, you're leaving out King Arthur.
oh yes, 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 yes. But him telling all four of them that like, I'm, or it telling all of them that it's bigger than all of that. Like it's you can't control what I am. That's why I was just like shocked to see all that, and I thought that I was awesome introducing this entity.
I mean, we introduced it back in the show. It's just, the comic gave us some room to explore it a little more.
Yeah, I thought it was like when it spoke to Pendragon, when it spoke to Arthur, in the show, I just thought, okay, this is something special about this, the Stone of Destiny. It can actually speak. So I loved how it continued, and it's like, no, it's more than that. It's a lot more than that.
I
Um,
mean, I think that's the idea. You scratch the surface of something, then when you have a chance, you go deeper. That's kind of what we do on Gargoyles. So that's just fun.
I love it. My last question about the SLG area is when it comes to Brooklyn. In the show, you made him the second in command of the Manhattan Clan. Then you took him on a life changing time traveling adventure into the past in the SLG era, and then you took him on another time traveling adventure that we have yet to see, where he popped up at the end of it with we have a new we have Food Dog, we have his wife, his mate, and his son Nash, uh, Katana, sorry, and for me, all of that were, compared to the other members of the Manhattan Clan, he has like the biggest change. So my theory, or so what I suspect, is Brooklyn, besides Goliath, of course, is your favorite. Like he is mine.
No,
Oh,
I
oh,
mean, which doesn't mean I don't love Brooklyn. I
oh
do,
yeah, yeah,
but
yeah.
you're asking me to pick among my children. I don't do that. That's not how I feel. I love them all. I, the show wouldn't exist without Goliath, so he's sort of in the forefront. But
Oh yeah.
this plan for Brooklyn was part of my plan for season 3 of Gargoyles, but then I didn't get to produce season 3 of Gargoyles,
Mm,
and they went a very different way with it in the Goliath Chronicles, which we don't count as canon because
no.
I didn't get to produce it.
Mm,
And um, so, this would have been part of the animated series. It was just the evolution of his character, but we're also evolving Broadway and Lexington as well in different ways. Uh, and I don't look at the trio and go, "Oh, I love Brooklyn and I'm okay on Broadway and Lexington." I just think they're all three great. They're very different, but I think they're all terrific.
uh, is someone had commented this in I think it was my Gargoyle Dark Ages video where I covered the whole series, but I didn't look it up to see it, but I didn't find that in like my research. Is Broadway, you know, the son of Hudson and his mate? I forgot her name.
Verity. I mean, she
Verity.
didn't really have a name, but in the script, because so that the artist would know who I was talking about, I
Mm,
named her Verity. Um, if you're asking if he is he the biological son of them, then the answer is yes. But the thing to keep in mind is that um, that's not how Gargoyle Society works. So
yeah, yeah.
Lexington is as much Hudson's son, and Brooklyn is as much Hudson's son as Broadway is. But if sort of behind the scenes you're asking, is in fact Broadway his biological son? The answer is yes.
Okay. I was just so curious about that. I was like shocked. I was like, I mean, when I looked at it, see how they look, I'm like, yeah, he looks like his mom. I was like, I can see that.
But his body shape is like his father's.
Yes. Now going into the dynamite stuff, you revealed bits of his time traveling adventure, specifically talking about Brooklyn. Do you plan on doing a Brooklyn miniseries, going over all of that, or gradually showing it throughout the next Gargoyle series?
I mean, again, that's the Time Dancer miniseries that we talked about earlier. If I had the opportunity, I would love to do it. Um, but I've already got a timeline, so I know not every detail, but a lot of what happened. And so, it'll get revealed as it gets revealed. If at some point Dynamite comes to me and says, "Hey, we want another miniseries," I'll pitch Time Dancer as I have the last 3 times that they've said that. And maybe this time they'll say, "Okay, yeah, let's do the Time Dancer one." But I don't control that. Again,
Mm-hmm.
that's not, we don't work in a vacuum. We work in the real world, and so there are all sorts of business considerations which are above my pay grade that decide what will and won't do. But but I'd love to do it. It'd be great.
That's the one I'm looking forward to the most. If it ever comes, because I love Brooklyn. I love what you've done with his character. And I would say that's actually my favorite portion of the SLG era is his time travel adventure back to the past, uh, and his whole journey throughout all of that. And then you made him a gargoyle of legend, which you revealed in the Demona series, uh, with her now carrying a sword, and that being her reasoning why.
Hmm. Yeah.
I mean, you did drop, a little tidbit in the Gargoyles Fantastic Four issue that just dropped. When he was fighting Cold Steel, he thought he was gonna electrocute him, and he was just like, "Well, I had it insulated last time we fought," and he's just like, "Wait, what do you mean?"
Right.
My last question for you is that it's such a coincidence that you had in the Fantastic Four and Gargoyles crossover, you had uh Xanatos and you had Tony Stark interact and then meet with each other because I know Xanatos is inspired by Bruce Wayne and also the General Wade Ealing from the Captain Atom series, the villain in that. Uh, were you shocked how popular were you shocked by how popular Xanatos became, especially when there's like a literal TV trope named after him called the Xanatos Gambit?
Um, I mean, I'm not really shocked by it. I think, like Demona, Xanatos was a truly original villain for 90s TV. You had a lot of villains who, their minions would fail, and so the the villain would punish the minion, and you're like, well, but you failed every time you hit face the heroes too. So, this whole idea of, oh, he wants to conquer the world, and he wants to slay the heroes. Well, Xantos was a guy who's like, no, I don't want to slay the heroes because the heroes might be useful to me down the road. And no, I don't need to conquer the world because I've made billions in this world. So I don't need to destroy it or anything like that. He just had a sort of refreshing, amoral as opposed to immoral point of view. So it doesn't surprise me that he's popular. It's very gratifying. I don't want to make it sound like, oh yeah, I expected it to happen. I just, I'm not surprised by it, but I'm gratified by it. And the whole Xanatos trope, that was something that largely Michael Reeves and Frank Parr and I came up with in season one to avoid what we call villain decay, which is that your villain keeps getting defeated by the hero. At some point, he stops being threatening. But one of the things that we did is that Xanatos always had machinations within machinations, so that even if he seemed to be defeated on what seemed to be the main point of the episode, you'd find out in what we called the Xanatos tag, which TV Tropes now calls the Xanatos Gambit. Um, we would just have this villain tag at the end where you found out, oh, that wasn't even the main thing he was interested in. He wanted Fox to get off on good behavior or something so he'd do all this stuff that seemed to have one goal in mind, and if that worked out, great. But if it didn't, it wouldn't matter because he'd still get this other thing that he wanted. And that was a way to keep him sharp as a villain, and to keep the gargoyles on their toes and to not allow for villain decay. And so, he, again, like Demona, he's a complex character. He's a lot of fun to write. I mean, a tremendous amount of fun to write. And I wouldn't say he's based on Bruce Wayne, although there's certainly aspects of that. He definitely is an evolution from General Wade Ealing, because that was a villain who also had machinations within machinations. But Ealing was a hard case, so he wasn't charming in any way. Whereas Xanatos is extremely charming, and a lot of credit for that should go to Jonathan Frakes, who played the character on the show. And even now, when I write Xanatos, I hear Jonathan's voice in my head. But some years ago, we did this radio play just for fun at a convention, and I had a quick scene with Xanatos and Bruce Wayne and Tony Stark, where they were forming a club called Rich Boys with Toys. And so the chance in the Marvel FF Gargoyles book to sort of get Tony in there and have a fun scene with Tony and David out of their armor, and then a fun scene with Iron Man and the red steel plant gargoyle, which is Tony and David in their armor. I was just grateful that Marvel's, I'm like, I'm doing a Fantastic Four thing. I'm like, hey, can I cameo Iron Man? They're like, sure.
Awesome.
So I was just glad they let me do it. But how, it's kind of a hard to resist, let's say low hanging fruit, but but it was a lot of fun to be able to do it. And it seemed to fit that particular story really well.
I mean, that's who I personally look at him as more. For me, my combination of Xanatos in my mind is Tony Stark with, some Lex Luthor in there, like him, being both of them. I could see both of them in him. But yeah, I love Xanatos is my favorite villain. He's my favorite villain on the show. He's one of my favorite villains of all time.
Thanks.
Uh,
Great fun. I mean, just terrific fun to write.
I love him a lot. Well, that was my final question. Again, thank you so much for taking the time out to do this interview with me. This is my first interview ever, so hopefully I didn't botch it.
Yeah, all good.
But I thank you again. I greatly appreciate it. And Gargoyles was one of the best shows I grew up watching, and I absolutely love it. And I loved now having to cover it comic wise on the channel, and I plan to cover every single thing you've ever written on it, the whole SLG area, and then everything with Dynamite you're doing, because I think it's fantastic. And I think people that find me on TikTok or YouTube, they talk about it and comment how much they also love it and grew up with it. So you've definitely influenced a generation and inspired a generation with this creative work of Gargoyles, along with the many other things you've done, which we didn't get into, but Gargoyles is so fantastic and it's great. So thank you again so much for everything.
Well, thanks, James. Thanks for having me on the show.
Other than that, I hope you have a fantastic day, and I can't wait to see what you cook up with Dynamite going forward after the Darkwing Duck and the Gargoyles crossover.
Thank you. I can't wait to see these. All right. Have a great day.
You too. Take care, and thank you so much.
All right. Bye.
Bye-bye.